Who has the best economic policy for America moving forward? Donald J. Trump or Kamala Harris? Today we're going to talk about that. All right, so this is an article by the BBC that was published 5 days from this recording. What are Harris and Trump's policies? They just run through give us a basic summary, right, Brian, of what each of them propose for the economy moving forward. So we're going to look first. It's right here. So very, very simple. Not very much information given, but we'll give our take. We'll try to add some detail that we know already. And so we're going to start with Kamala Harris. What is her economic policy, Brian?
Yeah, so her economic policy is more interventionist than Trump is. Trump has promised basically a cutback in what the federal government will do as far as intervention and so on in your daily life. And Harris has plans that are more basically direct impact from the federal government in what you do on a daily basis.
Oh, okay.
That's the 1,000-foot picture of what they're doing.
1,000-foot picture. So in this article, it talks about her proposing banning price gouging on groceries. I don't understand how that makes any sense. Does that actually work? Does price gouge? What exactly is price gouging? Maybe for people who don't know what that means exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Price gouging is if you have a rare commodity and you're charging more for it because the market will pay it.
So in case of like a hurricane, there's a hurricane coming to the area. There's a limited supply of gas for people, so you're upping that price of gas.
Exactly.
Okay, that's price gouging. So are grocery stores in general though price gouging in the?
So that does depend on the store.
Yeah.
Right now, generally, most grocery stores run about a 1.4% profit margin. So I think by definition, that is not going to be price gouging.
Oh, well, I don't even know why she's saying that. Why are groceries more expensive?
Now, that's a really good question. And basically what's driven that is the cost to produce those goods have gotten higher.
And why is that?
That's largely due to cost of energy. Gas has gotten more expensive, so that means you have to pay more to run the combines and so on. And that's trickled through to the cost of buying fertilizers, etc.
Okay, that makes sense. Why is energy getting higher? Shouldn't it be getting cheaper if you think about it? Right? Shouldn't we be more efficient in how we get energy at this point?
So that's a great question. And what's happening is we're right now in the midst of a transition between fossil fuels and green energy sources moving forwards. And this administration attempted to basically reduce the amount of reliance on fossil fuels and increase the amount of green energy used. What that unfortunately did is it drove up the cost of energy because we had to drive an entirely new infrastructure.
Oh, that kind of sucks.
It does. And it's kind of a classic example of governments pushing innovation rather than actual R&D pushing innovation, making something actually better.
Oh, okay. So R&D stands for
research and development.
Research and development, and that's produced by companies trying to compete in the market, be better than the other company next to them, so they can make more money from the consumers and actually provide a better service for them.
Precisely. And you're describing organic R&D, where one company, in order to compete with company A, company B has to do research to make their product better. And what happened in this administration is we pushed things through that weren't economically viable, but looked better on paper because they reduced greenhouse emissions, etc.
Question is, do they actually help the environment? Like, I've heard some people say, like, for instance, off the coast, I don't remember which coast it is, but there's a certain coast where they're having windmills in, but they're killing all the whales. Or this is what I guess RFK Jr. is saying or stating to people, like, hey, you're actually not helping the environment that much by just focusing on carbon, right? There's other things like clean water, clean air. Another thing is like nuclear power, right? Mm-hmm. Nuclear power would be super great. I've heard Vivek Ramaswamy talking about how in America it takes 20 to 30 years to get a nuclear plant put in place, whereas in places like France it takes them like 7 years to finally get it in place. So and I watched a video with Johnny Harris. We should actually react to it sometime. Him and Cleo Abrams, I think, they were presenting how effective nuclear energy is and actually how safe it is in comparison to every other energy form.
That's correct.
Yeah. So if for some reason in America we have this inability to create energy that actually could be viable, cheap, and clean, right? Through nuclear power. I don't know. I mean, I guess people are scared of the whole Chernobyl thing happening.
Yeah, so you brought up a lot of really good points there. Basically, what's happened is we've picked a certain segment of things we want to call green energy. So, wind power is big on that. Hydropower used to be big on that and is no longer actually considered green energy. Biomass, basically burning vegetation to create energy, and a few other things like that are currently considered those green energy sources. And as a part of that whole new green energy system, we have to move away from fossil fuels and develop alternate forms of energy storage because obviously, if you're doing green energy, it doesn't store energy quite as efficiently in the same way
Hmm.
as a liquid does if you're using fossil fuels, for example. So you can't use gasoline or a gasoline equivalent anymore. So it's more efficient to use electricity. So what we have is we have regulations that are pushing us to move into this electrical based economy when we're currently still producing vast amounts of energy using gas or natural gas. And what that means is that we have this overlay where we're actually burning gas to produce energy that's then stored to drive electric cars rather than burning the gas on site in the electric car or the gas powered car. And that's driven vast inefficiencies. So, yeah, to answer your question, there are things we can do. For example, moving to nuclear that would make electrical energy cheaper and more readily available. But also, as you cited, there are safety concerns with that as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna look up what specific policies are actually hindering nuclear from joining. I mean, we can just look at the AI here, what it's saying. So drug laws, no, Sorry, I didn't finish that sentence. Hindering nuclear plant development. So yeah, because it's weird. Oh, I don't know if we want to go through this whole thing, do we? U.S. nuclear power policy. I'll hit accept here. Okay, so while the USA has more private sector participation in the production of civilian nuclear power than any other nation, the government is heavily involved through safety and environmental regulations, R&D funding, and setting national energy goals. Beginning in the late 1990s, U.S. government policy and decision funding. So this isn't giving us any specific policies. Yeah, here we go. Over the last 30 years, public opinion has steadily grown. Oh no, sorry. I thought that was going to say it takes 30 years to produce a nuclear plant in the U.S. But maybe we can go through this later. This is very detailed. It looks like, and it's through the World Nuclear Association. But anyways, back to the Paul. So if we were to get back into nuclear energy, we could have a cleaner form of energy, cheaper. However, there are some people still worried we could have like a Chernobyl experience or a event happen. We don't want that like Russia faced, or was it actually Ukraine? I guess it was
That was the Soviet Union at that time.
Soviet
So
Union.
Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union.
Okay. So yeah, we don't want that. But from what I hear, nuclear is actually very, very safe, and usually they build them in such a way that you can't even run a plane into it, and it's not going to explode or anything, and you could even drop bombs on it, right? And it still won't explode.
So it depends on the type of bomb. If you put a nuclear weapon on top of a nuclear plant, it would definitely destroy it. But yeah, you're broadly correct that nuclear power is a vast, untapped resource that could drive a lot of very cheap electricity. And it's relatively safe now, definitely safer than it was in the 60s. And public opinion, I think, is gradually catching up with that. And regulators are kind of holding that back as well. But at the same time, it's kind of unvetted technology. And we've seen with electric cars, for example, how unvetted technology, if it's pushed too much ahead of its prime, will blow or catch on fire in the event of a hurricane, for example, in Florida right now.
Oh wow, yeah, that's not good. So should we just keep fracking and drilling oil at this point until another form of energy can be developed so that we can, I guess, help the environment, right? More.
So that's actually a really interesting question. Got a lot of layers to it. From an R&D perspective at this time, we don't have effective ways to replace our transportation network that currently relies on oil. So as a current economy, there is no other option. So we do have to continue drilling and fracking.
No. Oh, that stinks. Why? I don't understand. Why would the environmentalists be pushing? I mean, I get if global warming is such a bad thing, I get why they would want to really push trying to get to cleaner forms of energy. But the problem is I still think they're focusing on the wrong. They've been focusing on the wrong issue. It's only increased our cost of living significantly, and it really hasn't done anything to help the environment. very much right now.
In some ways, it's harmed it. I mean, we've pulled tons of lithium out of the ground, and when it catches on fire and so on, it's very much an environmental
And
hazard.
lithium is in what again? Sorry, it's in batteries, right?
It's in
The
batteries.
batteries. Okay. So the batteries to store all the energy and I mean our batteries are getting better. I will say that. Like that's maybe one positive. Some of the technology is getting a little more. It's improved quite a bit.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, our technology is improving. It's just not improving at the pace that government was trying to push it.
Okay. Well, we went from okay. So cost of energy is the biggest driver of the cost of goods going up. Then.
Yes, at the core, and also rising wages, especially during COVID, wages went up quite a bit, and that also drives up the cost of goods as well. But at its core, most of that rising value or most rising cost came directly from the cost of energy.
Okay. Well, what about the government printing? How much money did they print during COVID? It was quite a bit, right?
So during Trump's administration, they printed or they went about $7 trillion in debt. So that's about $7 trillion worth of printing.
They
And then,
printed $7 trillion in 1 year.
yeah, no, that was during all of Trump's administration. The deficit grew by $7 trillion.
Man, Trump, that's not good. That's too much money.
Yeah. And Biden is on track to meet or exceed that as well. And through COVID specifically, I think that was about $4 trillion worth of spending across both administrations, although I could be wrong.
Oh my goodness. And that's what really is increasing everything. And when it comes down to it, right? The supply of money goes up in the economy and since there's more supply of money, people can up their prices and it just affects everything. Cost of energy going up. So I guess the thing is, at this point, if Trump gets back in, can he fix things to make it a little cheaper for everyday consumers, really the middle class, because they're the people that hold the economy on the back, or like the economy is built on the backs of the middle class, essentially, right? Without the middle class, you're kind of, I don't know, people will just get frustrated. Like in
Exactly.
general.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And my personal opinion on this is that no, Trump can't fix it. As this article says, he's promised to deliver lower interest rates, for example,
I don't
something
think
that
he
he
can.
can't control.
Yeah.
And they're correct about that. The thing though is that we have two different mission statements here. The Harris mission statement really boils down to greater government intervention. And Trump has said repeatedly that he wants to repeal regulations. He wants to increase the amount of money that people can keep. For example, no taxes on tips, etc. No taxes on overtime.
Theoretically, Harris, I mean, technically, Harris has kind of copied that plan too, but
Exactly, but
she hasn't actually implemented it in this administration. So it's like, okay, you haven't done it yet. You're probably not going to do it in the future. It's like,
and exactly, and it's to me, it's really the greater mission statement. Trump wants less regulation, greater innovation, and a de-restricted economy.
greater innovation through the free market.
That's correct.
Okay, by deregulating things,
Exactly.
creates
Yeah.
greater.
We're seeing right now with SpaceX, they have a rocket ready to fly, but the FAA needs to do another environmental assessment, which is keeping them on the ground for up to another 2 months.
Oh,
And so things like that are a classic example of where the federal government is taking their time to review something, right or wrong, and holding up private innovation.
wow. So another thing that Trump was wanting to do, he says he wants to deport undocumented immigrants. Now, I've heard it go both ways with undocumented immigrants. People saying that actually cost of goods can be kept lower because theoretically people can pay these people under the table and keeping things cheaper. However, other people are saying, well, it's also a big burden on the social safety net that's like hospitals not having, because hospitals can't refuse somebody if somebody comes in sick. It's I've also heard the federal government giving some money and to house some of these illegal immigrants who come and claim asylum. Do you think what he has proposed here is going to actually help the economy?
Yeah, so deporting illegal immigrants does reduce that low wage workforce.
Mm-hmm.
I have my own opinions about that, whether or not that's actually constitutional. I think it takes us back to some of the issues with slavery, actually. But the
You don't think
deporting illegal immigrants will not vastly affect the economy.
you don't think well, I don't know. I don't know if this is the case. I mean, he claims that they're committing all these crimes and stuff. And theoretically, that would make sense. I mean, they're already committing a crime by coming into the country. I'm sure there's a lot of nice people that are coming across illegally, just trying to get a better life. But the issue that we're seeing is it just seems like it's unfair for the immigrants who are applying legally, and that actually would be beneficial to the economy based off of their skill set, right?
That's correct. Yeah, the economy, undocumented immigrants, I think, are going to be more or less a net neutral in the economy. Correct that they have lower cost of wages, but then they also are a load on that social safety net. And to be fair for everyone, immigration should be made legal across the board for everyone, and so that we don't have this legal versus illegal discussion.
Wait, what do you mean by that? So you're saying somebody could just walk into the border and say and be a legal immigrant? Is that what you're?
No, so my proposal is that we should force people to only take the legal process to immigration.
Oh, so you're saying like it's impossible across the border, essentially. Like,
That's correct. Yeah.
okay, would that cost? But theoretically, doesn't that cost us more by, I guess, putting I don't know, if we had the National Guard down there trying to block off the border, do you think that would cost the taxpayers more money?
I don't believe it will cost significantly more money. We already spent so much on defense, we could just divert a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. All right. So if we look here, Kamala Harris is also proposing I think it's a $25,000 um, down payment,
Down
right?
payment assistance. Yes.
Assistance for first-time home buyers, which is kind of nice for people like me who don't own a home. But would that actually be beneficial to the economy, or what would that do?
So this is her trying to win the votes of young people. Realistically, it will help our generation to get into homes because it will give us $25,000 down. So, for example, we can put a 10% down on a $250,000 home with no money saved up on our own.
Mm-hmm.
It does come with a couple complications, though, because if you give that $25,000 down, that makes us more competitive, which means that the broader market will have to raise their prices to meet our demand. So what that means is that housing will stay more expensive rather than housing coming down and make it more affordable for us to purchase just organically.
I know she was talking about a tax credit for children or for parents with children of up to $6,000. Is that right?
That's correct.
And what is a tax credit exactly? When they say, "Hey, we're going to give you a tax credit," does that mean you can write off $6,000 worth of expenses that you spend on your kids, or how does that work?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll wait and see exactly how she plans to implement that. But yeah, basically, it just means that you get a certain amount of tax of income that's not taxed.
Oh, okay. I mean, that's not bad either. So the price gouging on groceries is the one that you're like, okay, well, that doesn't make sense. The first-time home buyer, not really as good as it sounds. The $6,000 tax credit could be nice for people with kids. And for Trump, it sounds like delivering lower interest rates doesn't really sound too possible for him at this time. However, he does want to decrease energy costs by basically deregulating the energy market, opening up more oil wells, more fracking in the areas that he can. Although I have heard we are currently still producing more oil and gas than we ever have in American history, right?
Not only that, but we're the largest producer in the world.
So it's so frustrating. So why is it so expensive? That's what's irritating.
So the story that's not shown here is that we basically bowed to the Middle East for the 3 years of Biden's presidency. And that's why the prices went up as much as they did, because we reduced our own production. And last year, about this time, they started panicking over some polls because Trump does substantially better on the economy than the Democratic ticket did. And so what they did is they started just panicking and drilling everything. And so what they've done is we've basically moved into Trump's proposed economy of producing oil and gas as much as possible or domestically.
Yeah. Okay. One thing I will say this though, I have heard. Actually, I was listening to. Let's see if we can pull up Mark Cuban talking with. He's talking with the All In podcast guys, and he's talking about how Trump actually may have made the gas prices go up for a while. and I just want to go over this video. Let's see what you have to say. All right, so here's where Mark Cuban is talking with the All In podcast. We're going to just quickly watch and commentate on the video regarding Trump and oil and during 2020, potentially making the cost of oil and gas go up. I don't think he's giving us the full story, but it's good to listen to all sides. So here we go.
Yemen war, I can't say you actually, I'm a little bit of hyperbole, but I can trace that from that Yemen war to the start of inflation. And here's how I explain that. And so in Yemen, he did a deal for his boy in Saudi Arabia and sent them all the weapons in 2019. Fast forward 1 year, and you're in April, let's say, of 2020. And you're looking at the price of gas, the lowest it's ever been, the price of oil just collapsing. At one point, people were paying you to take their oil. And so there was an opportunity. He made a decision because there was a situation that came up. The oil companies came in and said, this price of oil being so low is killing us, right? We're losing a lot of money. We anticipate losing more because with the pandemic now starting, demand is dropping like a rock. And so that was coming from the oil companies.
Okay, so during 2020, obviously people weren't traveling as much, which meant that the cost of oil or the supply of oil was way too high in relative to how much people were actually spending on oil. So Mark Cuban is making the point that Trump made a deal with the Saudis saying, "Hey, we're gonna cut back oil production," and we'll hear more about it here in a bit. But basically, cut back oil production for a little bit so that we don't have this crazy supply and demand issue with oil during COVID. Is that?
It seems about what he's saying.
All right, let's get back into it.
And so what he did, he said, okay, MBS owes me a favor over in Saudi Arabia. That's the connection. And Putin's my boy. I'm going to go to them and ask them to reduce production. Now, what happens to the price of gas when the largest producers of oil and energy decrease their production? The price starts going up and up and up. And so you can track the increase in the price of gas and how that impacted the price of goods the entire time that the production from the 10% reduction until they increased it like 300,000 barrels a day for 2 years.
What is your argument here? You're saying that somehow Trump caused the inflation?
Yes. And I'm explaining it to you. Again, the mainstream media.
First of all, by the way, the war in Yemen started on March 26, 2015, according to ChatGPT, which is under Obama.
No, I get that.
That started under Obama.
That's fine, but he had a chance. He was asked to end it by Congress. He was selling $660 billion. I don't know the number. I can't remember.
Okay. So Mark Cuban's making the argument that Trump, because he made that deal with the Saudis, basically decreased the supply of oil in the economy for quite a bit of time, which led to the rise of energy costs after COVID and things were starting to open up due to the government finally letting people roam around and travel more. And here's the thing. I'm kind of sick and tired of people saying COVID shut us down. It wasn't COVID that shut us down. It was the federal government, or the governments of different states in the United States that shut us down. So to say that COVID was the reason, no, people theoretically could still roam around with the risk of getting COVID and potentially dying. There's some case for that. But the whole argument, COVID shut down the economy. No, people shut down the economy because they were thinking that they were protecting the citizens. So I just want to throw that out there. I'm kind of sick and tired of people saying that. But anyways, what do you think, Brian?
Yeah, so this is, again, very nuanced. A couple of things I wanted to point out. So first of all, during COVID, we did hit negative futures costs on oil, which is what they were talking about with paying people to take oil because we had oil sitting in the ports, needed to move it out. And so basically the companies that produce the oil were paying you to take it.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So you could buy oil for a couple weeks there, basically and get a credit for it. His conversation about the cost of oil being driven by the war in Yemen, though, I believe probably holds some water. But you're also political dialogue like this happens. First of all, it happens all the time. We have deals going with almost every country on earth, I imagine. And some of those are beneficial to us. Some of those drive inflation. and some of those are harmful to us, but we see a long-term gain. And so for Mark Cuban to point out this specific deal that Trump made with one of the oil-producing countries on Earth just shortly before he was voted out of office, during the middle of a pandemic when he probably wasn't even focusing on this, is, I think, a fairly major oversimplification from Mark's perspective. But I think that citing it as one of the possible inflationary pressures.
You're saying there's some weight to it.
There is possibly, yes.
Yeah.
I think the greater weight lies on the Biden administration continuing low interest rates for too long and quantitative easing for too long in the form of stimulus and easy loans.
When they could have opened up the economy. At that point, by I think mid 2021, we're like, okay, we know that COVID isn't quite as deadly as we all assumed. In fact, I would argue by mid 2020, we already knew that. And theoretically, they could have opened it up by then, but people didn't want to. So, obviously, people still died from COVID. I think we had the Delta wave. Was that going on in 2021? I don't remember, but it was that one was a little bit scary because it was a little bit more contagious. Yeah. And so, but the idea that they knew we had a vaccine that seemed to be effective at the time, and they could have opened up the economy and didn't have to pump more money into it from the Federal Reserve just printing it for them and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. And to get back to Mark's point here, I actually agree with his major assessment here, which is government action tends to be inflationary. It tends to be behind the curve, and by the time the policy is enacted, usually the opposite scenario is occurring. And I think personally that government actions through the rest of 2020 and 21, like we're talking about, were far more inflationary than what he's discussing. But the point still stands that government action, especially in cases like this, where you drive the price of oil, leads to inflation.
So Trump's not perfect, and he even led to the energy rise as well. So just to say, stating that, it was just the Biden administration with their lack of, or cut with them putting more regulations and trying to push green energy out there. They're not really the only cause of this crazy inflation that we've seen. Trump also is responsible for it too.
Government action in general, yes.
Summary.
Yeah. So basically what we went through is that the Harris government will tend to be more interventionist, and the Trump government, he has intervened in things like specifically the oil that we discussed in Yemen with the Saudis during that war. Trump tends to be less interventionist, especially in both his foreign and domestic policies. And so what that results in is typically less government intervention, which means less government spending, which results in lower inflation. And so Trump, I think, is correct in saying he will reduce inflation. And Harris's policies generally tend more towards that inflationary stand because she tends to want a more interventionist style of government.
Do you have an opinion of whose policy you think is better?
So I would describe it as Harris is continuing us down this path of high spending and high intervention, continuing to go up. And that's a path we've been on for the past 20 years. It started probably around 2000 and with the Iraq War and has continued.
Okay.
The Trump presidency will continue us on that path as well. I don't want to mislead anyone in saying that he'll be a major change for the country. But I do think that he has some good ideas as far as trying to start us down a little different path of maybe less interventionism as well as possibly decreasing spending long term.
Please don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. We love hearing from you guys, and we can't wait to talk more money in the future. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.